Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Hillary Clinton and her never-ending scandals. The FBI's decision to continue its investigation into her use of emails presents the troubling prospect of a protracted political crisis. Is winning the election now the least of her problems? To CrossTalk Hillary Clinton's emails, I'm joined by my guest, Mark Crispin Miller in New York. He is a professor of media, culture, and communication at New York University, as well as author of Fooled Again, The Real Case for Electoral Reform. Also in New York, we have Don DeBar. He's an anti-war activist and host of a daily radio program. And in Washington, we cross to Bruce Fein. He is a constitutional lawyer and a former Associate Deputy Attorney General under President Ronald Reagan. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much appreciate it. I must say, gentlemen, there's so much to discuss here. There's so many different odds and ends coming into play, and a lot of different decisions have been made, and we know about the commentary of what the head of the FBI, James Comey, in his decision to continue with this investigation. But I'd like to start very broadly with Bruce. Given your knowledge of constitutional law, what really bothers me the most at this point is that we could have an elected president under federal investigation, criminal investigation, going into the White House. Now, that's not going to sit very well with a lot of people, particularly the person, if she wins, that didn't vote for her. Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, that's exactly right. I was there and worked in the Watergate investigation of then President Richard Nixon, and the conclusion at that time reached by the acting Attorney General Robert Bork and others was that a sitting president cannot be indicted criminally and prosecuted, that impeachment is the only route. After impeachment, if it succeeds, then you can criminally prosecute. So we would be in this situation if the criminal investigation culminated in some kind of charge against a then President Clinton. We'd be forced into an impeachment situation because there isn't any ability to prosecute a sitting president under the Constitution. In my view, the whole thing was wrong-headed from the outset of the investigation, the emails, because we have an investigation run by the continuing director of the FBI, James Comey, and then the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, both who could be promoted, and they're politically ambitious people, by the target of the investigation, Hillary Clinton. So you have a glaring conflict of interest at the outset. Hillary Clinton could make James Comey Attorney General if she's elected. She could make Loretta Lynch a Supreme Court Justice, or maybe Secretary of State, whatever else she wanted. And so there should have been a special prosecutor, as was the case in Watergate from the outset. If that were true, we wouldn't be in this kind of dilemma, because I can guarantee you that when there was a special prosecutor that we used the FBI during Watergate, the FBI didn't make the decisions to investigate or not and go forward. That was made by the accountable special prosecutor.
You know, Mark, weigh in there, because this is one of the, I mean, what Bruce just said there, he didn't use the words, but pay to play. So, I mean, we could have these other characters involved in the story and they could be promoted. I mean, that sounds exactly what the Clinton Foundation does. But one of the things I find very interesting is that the 650,000 emails, that sounds like the entire time Hillary Clinton was at the State Department. I think that's one of the reasons why we have them saved on an unsecure computer. Go ahead.
Well, I don't think there's any question but that this should have been investigated, and I agree with Bruce that it should have been investigated properly. But I can very easily imagine a special prosecutor being subject to the same kind of abuse that you know, Comey has attracted for his decision to you know, look into the emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop and to announce his intention to do so a week before the election. I mean, I've been staggered throughout this whole latest crisis by how the Democrats are partying like it's 1953.
Yeah.
I mean, you have you know, James Carville actually invoking the specter of the KGB. You have Paul Krugman and Robert Reich, you know, self-professed staunch liberals, really sounding like the most troglodyte anti-Soviet hysterics of decades ago, clearly as a kind of stratagem to deflect attention from the substance of the charges. You know, and it's I have to say I've never seen anything like it.
Well,
really.
John, if I can go to you, I don't think any of us, and I don't like it, and I don't want it to happen again, but it seems to get worse and worse here. You know, that's a really good point that Mark brings up. Is that you know what is the content of these emails, and that's what we all want to know. Hillary Clinton says have them exposed and let everyone read them. We know that's not going to happen because they're under investigation right now. So. You know, I have to wonder, where's the key here? Is it Weiner? Is he the one that really has the key to all this? Is he talking to prosecutors, cutting a deal for himself and his estranged wife?
Or is he texting a 14-year-old girl and asking her to look at a picture of his boxers? You know, all of this is breaking in a political condition where there's a huge division among the electorate, among the population of the United States, with a great deal of acrimony, maybe unprecedented since the Civil War. Yeah. And in addition to that, sitting on top of a looming financial crisis, an economic crisis, and a international geopolitical environment where the specter of World War III is being seriously considered as a possibility. You know, we talk about going into a constitutional crisis, perhaps, over an indictment of Clinton if she wins after the election. But it seems that with the polling, as reliable as it may or may not be, it's quite possible we might end up in the House of Representatives because somebody didn't get enough electoral votes, and or in front of the Supreme Court with charges of fraud of all types. A Supreme Court that right now is evenly divided. It only has 8 members. And also, though, this crisis of basically a crisis of confidence in the institutions, a crisis of legitimacy of the entire apparatus, the government, the media, across the board among the entire population. So you have an explosive condition with all kinds of superstructural problems like the global economy and political division in the United States, where the outcome of this election may be uncertain, decided by the elite in the eyes of one or the other half of the population, and maybe the possibility of actual civil unrest as a consequence of it.
Yes. You know, Bruce, again, going back to Constitution.
If I can jump in here and make this observation.
Go ahead.
It is true that in the past, when presidents have been under attack, and I remember when Bill Clinton had the impeachment proceedings against him, he was launching rockets into Iraq and Afghanistan to deflect the tension, and even into Sudan. It was a veterinary pharmaceutical factory. And so we cannot underestimate that potential out there, which is quite troublesome. Okay, we'll deflect the tension from domestic things by doing crazy things abroad, whether it's going into Eastern or Central Europe, or Poland, the Baltic states, or China, the South China Sea, anything to deflect the tension. The other thing that I'd like to make the observation about is that's really been unrecognized is that how do these government documents end up in private hands?
Exactly.
I mean, when Ed Snowden, and I have to confess, I actually represented his father. Ed Snowden takes those, he's charged with what? Theft of government documents, among other things. Well, how do all these emails that are State Department property end up on Anthony Weiner's computer? Somebody stole the documents, irrespective of whether there's any classified information or otherwise.
Exactly. Here, hang on. Mark wanted to jump in. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Right, thanks. I wanted to follow up on Don's point and add to the catalog of crises that he correctly laid out for us. He said that the outcome of the election may be uncertain. Well, I can assure you that the outcome of the election will be uncertain because the outcomes of all our elections are necessarily uncertain. I mean, not the least important crisis that we're actually facing here, and it's one that the entire media in the U.S. has been hysterically denying, is that we have the worst voting system in the developed world. And that's not just my opinion. That was the finding of the Electoral Integrity Project at Harvard University and the University of Sydney in the spring. It's something that Jimmy Carter confessed on NPR in 2006. We have a voting system that is largely computerized and privatized. It is no more honest and trustworthy than the last person who's had his hands on either the op scans that count the votes or the machines. Now, let me add that this is something that Donald Trump, as usual, has discussed, but in a kind of a crude and exaggerated way that makes sensible discussion very difficult. He invokes the specter of people voting 15 times. Well, that almost never happens. That kind of old-fashioned voter fraud is pretty much impossible under the system we have today. But he's right to say that the election can, in some sense, be rigged. It is extremely vulnerable.
Well,
so you know, I want to note just in conclusion that neither of the two parties has done anything to fix this situation. And since we, you know, profess to be the world's greatest democracy, it is really a scandal of the highest order.
Well, a bigger scandal is a bigger. Hang on, I want to go to you right now, Don. The election is rigged in a different way. The media has rigged it. Is absolutely rigged it in favor of Hillary Clinton. If you look at the mainstream in here, go ahead, Don. Before we go to the break, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a variety of ways in which elections are stolen in the United States, and some of the techniques are used more often by Republicans, for example, voter suppression, voter caging and such, and some by the Democrats. And in this particular election, you have an alignment of the elites of both parties behind Hillary Clinton. That's at the state level also, where you have the Secretary of State and the commissioners of elections and all of that. And so if you look at the primary election, and it's ironic, Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. State Department has a standard for a vector between the exit polls and the actual declared official result, where beyond this standard, beyond this vector, they will not recognize the election as being legitimate. And like half of the primary elections that Clinton won this year exceeded that by some of them by 2 or 3 times.
Yep. Okay, exactly. Gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Hillary Clinton's email. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the final stretch of the U.S. presidential election. Okay, well, Bruce, I'm going to ask you first, and then I'll ask the rest of the panel. James Comey, is he a hero or a villain? Because he has found himself in a very, very bad spot, okay? I think it's because he made a mistake earlier, and there wasn't a grand jury, and now he's paying for it. Go ahead.
Well, I'd cite Alexander Pope, you know, to err is human, to forgive is divine. I don't think he's either a hero or a villain. I think he's human, and he made a blunder here. He made a blunder, first of all, by trying to go beyond initially in explaining his decision to at least initially decide not to move forward with the prosecution. I think he made a blunder at that stage in saying that's really not my decision. We need to give it to a special prosecutor because I have a conflict of interest. If Hillary Clinton, the target of the investigation, is elected, she could promote me or benefit me. He clearly made a blunder in my judgment when he went ahead, and now we're reopening the investigation knowing that 650,000 emails can't be reviewed by the time of election, which is going to create a cloud over everything. Yep. And it's a huge, huge mess. And but I don't think this is a matter of, of individuals as opposed to the system itself falling down. I want to just add the comment about the media bias. We just had the stories today that one of Clinton's closest assistants, both during Bill's administration and afterwards, Donna Brazile at CNN, was handing off in advance the questions that she had uncovered that CNN was going to ask Hillary Clinton, at these presidential debates. Now, if that was done on the Republican side, you can imagine if it was Fox News. Every single headline is that, oh, wow, they're Oregon. This is just an organ of the Republican Party. There's no separation. And that, again, it undercuts, the ability of an informed electorate to make decisions because they're not getting the straight story from the media. It's clearly biased with regard to the establishment.
Mark, same question about James Comey. I think he did the right thing. He just did it really late in the game here. That's all. Go ahead, Mark.
I agree with that. I think he did the right thing, and I think he did it too late. I think he made a number of errors, as Bruce said. But, I don't want us to get lost in the weeds of this discussion about Comey per se. I think it's extremely important that we note that we wouldn't be going through this gut-wrenching, unprecedentedly eye-popping experience, this circus of a presidential campaign, if the nomination hadn't been systematically stolen from
Agreed.
the most popular
Agreed.
candidate in this
Agreed.
race on both sides, and that's Bernie Sanders.
Agreed.
And this has everything to do with every aspect of election theft that we've discussed here. I mean, clearly the press that's now functioning as an overt cheering section for Hillary Clinton was also unanimous in its scorn and its derision and its put-downs of Bernie Sanders. But more significant than that, I mean, more significant than what the media had to say is how the people's vote in primary and caucus after primary and caucus was subverted.
Yeah.
I mean, people need to read the study Democracy Lost from Election Justice USA. It's readily available online, 108 pages, chapter and verse of the use of both vote suppression and election fraud to rob Bernie Sanders of the candidacy, but more importantly, to rob the American people of a really viable choice that they overwhelmingly chose, and that includes even people on the right, you know. I mean, Don is right to say that a certain kind of election theft has been the specialty of the Republicans for a long time. What we're seeing now is in a sense, the world turned upside down.
Yep.
That it is the Democrats who have used these devices basically to destroy the candidate on their own left, you know? The Republicans now are continuing to engage in vote suppression and some small amount of election fraud. The Democrats are engaging in some small amount of vote suppression and what looks like a considerable amount of election fraud, computerized election fraud. It is really, I want to say this again, this is a scandal that you know, we the people have to face eventually.
Let me add
a corrupt voting system.
Let me add to the corruption and the world turned upside down. Go to Don right now. We haven't discussed the all-important presidential power of the pardon here. We could see, unlikely, but we could see Barack Obama pardon Hillary Clinton. Either way, what happens on the election day. Or we could have the prospect of a Hillary Clinton, like her husband, being impeached, and then she would pardon herself. That would be very much in line with Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton only thinks about Hillary Clinton. Go ahead, Don.
Well, first, I just want to, take what Bruce said before a step further, which is, of course, regardless of which one of them, or any of them, as a matter of fact, theoretically, is elected, their job is at the mercy of the next president of the United States. And so for whichever way conflict would break, Comey should not be treating it this way. They should have a special prosecutor, no matter what, because it directly impacts basically on the job of the people conducting, the AG, the FBI, all the people involved in the food chain of conducting an investigation. There's that first. And, the selling of the theft of the election over this, the primary period. What we're talking about, people have heard here on RT and in a few other media places and on the internet, but it's really not been the topic of discussion in the New York Times or CNN or any of those places where, the mass American audiences are.
Kidding.
And so it's being, it was stolen, but in plain sight, but most people aren't aware of it or don't factor it into their narrative. Finally, at the end of the day, there are these massive problems that are facing the people in the United States, and that fact has been manifest in the vote that lifted Sanders, the vote lifting Trump, the people in the streets in the United States, Black Lives Matter, and everything else. That's not going to go away, no matter who's elected in November. And the election is going to be viewed through the prism of A, our situation is intolerable, and B, our institutions are not a solution to it. That is going to be the soil in which whatever plays out November 9th will play out.
Bruce, it's very interesting.
If I could add your specific question.
Go ahead.
And that's a president can't pardon somebody who doesn't agree to accept it and acknowledge a violation of the law. So if Hillary Clinton accepted the pardon, she would be admitting that she had violated the criminal law. That would not shield her from an impeachment proceeding, because at that point the House of Representatives could say she's already acknowledged she committed a crime that related to the integrity of her processes as Secretary of State.
No,
she's
but
not trustworthy.
Exactly, but Bruce,
on her sword.
James Comey told us that she had broken the law repeatedly, but he decided not to indict. This is the circus. This is amazing here, okay? Let me go to Mark here, because we're rapidly running out of time. One of the things that's really tragic for the country and for the world, as Don pointed out, is that whoever is inaugurated in January, the country is going to be very deeply divided. It's going to be a very, very tough time moving forward. And as Don has pointed out, there's so many critical issues that need to be addressed. We need to get out of this cesspool that these elites have brought us into. Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to follow up on his point about how the press has not informed the American people about the facts of election theft. I mean, as someone who has written 2 books on the subject, I can tell you from personal experience that this is a forbidden topic in the eyes of the U.S. media establishment, which I guess is to say the U.S. government, because I see no daylight between our free press and the state, none whatsoever. And that subject of election theft, which is, its importance cannot be overstated, is only one of a broad range of vital subjects, urgent subjects that our press either ignores completely or radically, grossly misrepresents. I mean, as far as the election's concerned, all we keep hearing is that Russia may hack the election. This is a claim with no basis whatsoever in fact, and it's also part of what appears to be a fevered attempt to lay the groundwork for some kind of perfectly distracting military adventure against Russia, which has a nuclear arsenal and which is being represented repeatedly, consistently, and completely misleadingly as an aggressor on the world stage. I mean, this may sound like an exaggeration, but reading the New York Times about Putin's intentions on the world stage reminds me, I mean, very, very directly of passages in William Schirer's Berlin Diary. When he was stationed over there in the 30s for CBS, he marveled at the Nazi papers describing Poland as a threat to Germany, after a year before having described Czechoslovakia as a threat to Germany. This is a complete and utter, and this was the antithesis of reality, and this is what we read consistently in the New York Times, the Washington Post. We hear it on CNN. It is really genuinely frightening and represents, I mean, to put it charitably, a new low in the quality of American journalism.
It's only going to get lower, I'm afraid. That's why I do what I do. Don, if I can go to you. I mean, if Russia... Let me get this right here. If Russia wanted to influence the election, then why didn't Vladimir Putin participate in a pay-to-play with the Clinton Foundation? I mean, everybody else did, okay? Foreign governments did. I mean, that would have been the way through, and they would have taken the money. Oh, yes, they would have taken the money, okay, to a charity.
Oh, for sure.
Go ahead, Don. You get the last word here. 40 seconds. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, Russia is a player on the world stage like every other nation that is on the world stage, and a major player both because of the size of its economy and population and land mass, and also because it's a major military power in the world. And so you have to look at Russia in that context when you start walking around doing what you did with Iraq, for example, and painting it as an existential threat to the United States, or these other countries that they've treated from time to time as an existential threat to the United States right before they obliterated them.
Right.
If they try that with Russia, and it appears that they're walking that way, there's an entirely different outcome that encompasses a lot more human beings and real estate than any of the previous ones in the aggregate, and that scares the hell out of me.
All right, I'm going to jump in here, gentlemen. My last comment here is they should install showers in every voting booth, because a lot of people are going to want to take a shower after this election here. Many thanks to my guests in New York and in Washington. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules. I love you.